Welcome to the Therapists Uncut Podcast, where off-the-clock therapists who happen to be friends share their uncensored thoughts about real life. Join us weekly in spreading positivity and making mental health relatable through casual conversation, inspirational stories, and real talk with friends who happen to be therapists. Please welcome your co-hosts, Nikki Young and Alyssa Najera.
Welcome back to Therapists Uncut. I'm Nikki Young here with my fabulous co-host, Alyssa Najera. And today we are wrapping back around. I know June just finished out Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, so we're wrapping back around. I know we didn't get to hit on that in June itself, but we are here today to talk about a super important topic that deserves some time and attention.
I agree. I actually thoroughly enjoy working with males, and so I'm pretty stoked about this topic. And I think part of it is because we talk about the stigma associated with mental health, but now specifically take that stigma and apply it to the male population, and it's even higher because there's just so many expectations as a culture that we put on our male population. So I am ready to do this episode.
And this topic just fits so well with our mission, right? To make mental health a topic of everyday conversation. And like you just said, that dynamic is even more astounding in the male population. So totally fits our mission here to make mental health more relatable and reduce stigma.
Yes, and we are going to touch on some sensitive topics today because it's just a part of what we talk about when we talk about mental health and depression. So just be very mindful of that. But for the most part, we will do our very best to keep you guys engaged, awake, and enlightened. So hang in with us.
All right, let's do this. So you started down the road of stigma. Alyssa, talk to us a little bit about stigma specific to men's mental health.
It doesn't exist. What do you mean? Men can't feel depressed or anxious or have bipolar symptoms or any kind of psychosis. Why? Because it just doesn't exist in men. I mean, that's what I hear. Yeah.
Fix it. Yeah.
Fix it.
And is there anything wrong with masculinity in general? No, but can it rise to this level of toxic masculinity? Absolutely. And these expectations that, I mean, if we're going to get super general here, okay, I'm not saying that because that would be stereotyping. I'm not, but there are a lot of males that would identify as fixers, right? That's how, whether they naturally are or society has trained them up to be, like, let's fix shit. So if something's not going quite right, you're feeling a little bit off, let's fix it. Let's figure it out for themselves, right? They're not going to share or even think to seek help a lot of the times. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
Yes, suck it up, buttercup. Why? Because you're a guy and you're a man and you need to get through this and there's no reason for you to wuss out. Don't be weak. Don't show emotions. That's what I hear.
Boys don't cry.
Sure don't. But you know what's amazing is when we are in session or when I have a colleague or friend or family member who is able to identify and communicate feelings, it's the most beautiful thing because a lot of males in our culture are not taught how to do this. They are simply taught to push through it. Get up and don't cry. Mm-hmm. And now imagine what that does when you are taught to suppress your entire life. And now it's coming out in anger and alcohol and drug use and irritability. Because I was never taught how to talk about this stuff or even recognize it, let alone deal with it.
Absolutely. And mental health in and of itself has not been talked about in society. We've talked about that, right? But I think even now, as it's starting to be more of a topic of conversation, a lot of the rhetoric is focused around symptoms that might be more likely to be found in females, right? So depression can look different in men versus women. It doesn't have to, but it can, right? So men are they're less likely to get maybe sad and weepy, but they're more likely to get grouchy, crabby, irritable, and angry. And both of those can be signs of depression. But even as society starts to talk about it more, we're going to focus more on the feminine symptoms.
Mm-hmm. So if you identify as a male and you are listening to this episode, I really want you guys to take in all of this information and decide what you want to do with it, because we want to validate you. If you have ever questioned whether or not you felt depressed or anxious, or there are some things that just don't feel right, but you don't have the words to explain, hopefully we're going to be able to help give you those words and that terminology today. I like to tell people that we are increasing your feelings vocabulary. So just kind of like your Chinese or your Spanish, your English vocabulary. If your feelings vocabulary is pretty small, we're going to do our best to help you work it up today so you guys have more words in order to help express yourself and communicate.
Before we recorded this today, last night, I was just curious, like if a guy Googled like mental health for men or men's mental health, if they got curious and didn't have the language around it and just Googled it, I was kind of curious what information they would get. And I came across this website, and I didn't remember what it's called, but it was something about like man therapy or man mental health. And
I totally know which one you're talking about.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so keep going.
No, I clicked on it, and the language, at first I was like, wait, what is this? And I thought it was kind of making fun of it, but then I realized, no, it's not. And I loved the language it was using because it just made everything so much more graphic, even for myself, right? If I was not a mental health professional, I would much more identify with the language they were using than some of these, I don't know, should I use the word floofier websites around mental health? Like, I dug it. So yeah, let's make it real.
I wish I knew it. I don't remember what the website is called. If we can remember, we will put it up for you guys on our show notes, and you can check it out at therapistuncut.com. But I have come across that website before, and I remember, I think I've recommended it a few times because you're right. The language is spot on, and talk about relatability. Like this guy on this website, I actually don't know if he's like a doctor or not. Whatever he's doing, it's relating to a lot of the male population because, again, we don't teach our boys, our men, how to talk about this stuff. So how can we expect them to do it as into their adulthood?
Mm-hmm. I mean, just take for a second, if you're a guy and you're listening, or if you're not and you've got guys in your life, stop and think for a second about all the ways that you've either been trained to not accept or identify or acknowledge mental health. And if you got guys in your life, like think about if you're contributing to that dynamic at all. Because I think a lot of this is subconscious. It's not something, I mean, a lot of it, yes, it's intentional, but some of it is just so ingrained in us that we don't realize what we're doing in the way that we respond to men.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we're trained to be the breadwinner, the protector, the caretaker. And if you are fulfilling any one of those roles, then you can't cry. You can't express sadness. You can't express anything other than anger.
Stress and anxiety? You mean guys in the breadwinner role that get stressed and anxious about these things?
Yeah, those are the words, guys. Use these words to help you identify and communicate how you are feeling, because anger is the most acceptable form that our culture, accepts. When, I don't know, help me. How do I want to say this, Nikki? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. Like, okay, so for a guy to break down and cry out in public, it's going to garner a lot of attention, and it's going to be viewed historically by society as weakness, right? But if somebody hauls off and punches a guy, I mean, that's going to be pretty accepted in society. I mean, okay, not accept, but you know what I mean? It would be much less shocking to see a guy get in a fight than a guy get emotional.
For sure. It's like the most
anger
acceptable.
is a form of emotion, but to get tearful.
Right. It's like the most acceptable form of behavior in our male culture. And if you are struggling with symptoms of depression, so if we're talking about feeling isolated, or I know we talked about in the past that people associate sadness with depression, and yes, depression can be sadness, but it's also that numbness, the lack of motivation, the decreased sex drive. There's a lot of symptoms that come with depression, but it also comes out in irritability and outbursts and anger.
And you just said sex drive. I mean, is that something guys are allowed to talk about? Nope. They're supposed to want it all the time, right? And they're supposed to be able to perform all the time. And if they're not, then there's something wrong with them, not, hey, you're stressed, or hey, you're anxious, or hey, you're depressed.
Mm-hmm. And on the topic of depression, we did bring a few stats for you guys just to give you an idea of how common men's mental health appears in our country. I think these stats are based on the United States. We're located in the U.S. So nearly 1 in 10 men, 1 in 10, experience depression and anxiety. 1 in 6 men, and this is a highlight of one of the topics I'm passionate about because I focus a lot on this topic in my clinical work. At least 1 in 6 men have experienced some sort of sexual trauma. I'm going to repeat that again. 1 in 6 men have experienced some sort of sexual trauma, either as a child, either as a young adult, as an adult. And this is very likely underreported because sexual abuse and sexual assault isn't something our society talks about, on a daily basis. So now be a male who has been a victim of sexual abuse. It's very likely underreported. So these are the topics that we want to talk about. And there's a few more stats on depression and suicide that I'll let Nikki take over on.
And even with, the depression stats, I've done a lot of reading that's likely underreported across the board, but specifically with males, right? Because we only know from those that are seeking services or self-reporting when we do these studies. And do women underreport as well? Yes. However, that is much more likely in the male population. So across the board, these stats sound significant, like we're making a statement, but yet think about the fact that it's probably even way more prevalent than these stats are indicating. And then, I know Alyssa's passionate in her work, like she just described, around sexual trauma. I'm passionate about the crisis work and the safety concerns and suicide and homicide and such. And in my work, we see this all the time. But males, and the numbers vary, but in the U.S., men are between 3 and 4 times more likely to complete suicide. So women are more likely to attempt suicide, but men are 3 to 4 times more likely to complete this act. And, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but men tend to use more lethal means of suicide. So more violent methods that are more likely to ensure death as a result. And, we can make guesses and hypotheses about why that is, whether that's but we don't really know, right? We can only make these hypotheses. Are men just more intent on completing this act? Are they less likely to seek support leading up to this? Do they have more access to these lethal means? I mean, if you look at the statistics, a higher percentage of men are gun owners than women. But does that mean that women don't have access to their male family members' guns, or just men just more likely? You can make guesses on why that is, but that number is pretty astounding, and we need to take that into account. Right? Particularly middle-aged older men, Caucasian, divorced men, very, very, very significant suicide risk when there's undiagnosed depression or life events.
Yeah, I'm feeling really sad now. I'm all listening to Nikki over here. If you guys are listening on the other end,
I'm passionate about this stuff.
And Nikki, as you were talking, I remembered it was mantherapy.org. So we have no idea who this guy is. We have no affiliation or association with him, but we have come across the website.
I don't know his credentials. I don't know if he's qualified. All I know is that the language he was utilizing around mental health and depression and anxiety for guys, I loved it once I got into it and realized what he was doing. Because it again, like I said, even for myself, a lot of the material out there feels very floofy to me and I can't think of a better word, but
here's the thing, guys, therapists, we're not the greatest marketers. Nobody taught us how to do marketing and tell you what we offer. So you might come across some of our websites and it looks like you're reading a resume because nobody taught us. And most of us are self-taught. So whoever this guy is, he nailed all of the content on his website. And if you are interested, go check it out. Let us know what you think.
And okay, so that alone, I mean, you just identified the marketing piece, but is that going to be a deterrent for a lot of guys to seek? Let's say that they take a breath, they recognize there's something going on. They recognize that they need support. And then they Google therapy or they search therapy in their area and they start clicking on websites. How many of these websites are fairly gender neutral and inviting to both sexes or any gender? A lot of these websites of therapy, Alyssa gets a little oh, wait a minute. Maybe
they're so pink and pretty.
There's so many flowers and yeah.
I get it. Nature is calming, guys. But somebody once told me, if I go to your website and you're a therapist and it looks like I'm visiting the fucking mortuary, you better do something about that. Ain't nobody going to be ready to go see you. This is depressing. But you're right.
Right?
You're totally right.
Therapist websites are going to be gender neutral, inviting to all genders, and it's very, a lot of them are very, and apparently that's my word of the day, floofy. So I dig that this guy was neutralizing that and just making it more identifiable for the stereotypical heterosexual guy. But then we run into another issue. Okay, so men in general are at higher risk for all of these things that we've talked about. Gay and just non-heterosexual men, queer men, are at an even higher risk of undiagnosed or untreated depression, anxiety, suicide, just like any marginalized category, right?
And every time we talk about suicide, I mean, we're talking about mental health every single episode, but especially when we talk about suicide and depression, we are always going to provide you guys with resources. So please go to the website, therapistuncut.com, for show notes. We do have a resource page on there, so you guys are welcome to explore that and connect with resources either in the area or nationally. Please check it out. This is something that we are highly encouraging you guys to learn more information about. If at any point in your life you wondered what was going on, why this doesn't feel right, I feel like I can't talk to this about anybody, or I feel like if I do, I'm going to be seen as weak. If you've had any of those thoughts, please check out what is available to you. And I'll also say, and we've said this before, if you call one therapist, two therapists, and you don't get a call back, or they're not taking new clients, do not let that deter you, because mental health needs are on the rise right now. People are filling up. But keep making the effort, keep trying to get in with somebody, and somebody that you click with has to be somebody that you click with. Otherwise, this is not going to work.
Definitely. I just want to wrap back around and acknowledge that we are being very general here today. I mean, that would be like lumping all women into one episode and saying, this is how women experience mental health, right? It's not that simple. If there's 100 guys in a room, then there's 100 different ways that mental health can be experienced, right? So I don't want to overgeneralize, but we did want to make an episode about men's mental health because that as a topic, I think is so significantly important. So if you've listened to this and you're a guy and you've not identified with much of it, that's okay, right? That doesn't mean you're not a guy, or it's just, we wanted to address some of the stereotypes that exist in society, and some of the major stereotypes about toxic masculinity. If you're not a guy and you're listening to this and you're identifying with it, cool, right? If you, like I said, there's marginalized groups of men, transgender men, gay men, that's African American, whatever, right? There's so many different subtypes. There's so many different ways that this could express itself differently. Recognize that we were very general today, but that was a point. We wanted to address some of these stereotypes.
And speaking of the topic of men's mental health in general, I think it's really cool that a lot of celebrities and people that you guys may have heard of are openly speaking about this and using their public platforms to talk about depression and anxiety. So many people in the music industry, I mean, listen to the songs that you guys are relating to, that you guys are hearing on the radio. There's so much hurt and pain and so much of these lyrics. Tech Nine talks about depression and the importance of addressing your mental health. We talk about Tech Nine all the time. One day we really are going to get him, guys. We're going to do our very best to get him on this, little old therapist.
Fangirling so hard.
I know, because he's so dope. And he's got a great story too. So who else that is in the public eye has openly talked about either their own mental health or talked about the importance of seeking resources for mental health?
I mean, so many, right? And it's been cool to see individuals with the public's attention start to utilize their platforms to neutralize and validate mental health. Athletes like I think Michael Phelps has recently talked about his journey with mental health. Terry Bradshaw, I believe. A lot of actors. The Rock has become pretty vocal, I think, about his experience with depression.
The Rock is pretty dope as well. I like him.
And if you heard that and you had any sort of reaction like, what? The Rock? Depression? That speaks to what we're talking about, right? Big guy, ripped, built, humongous, just what? He can have depression? I mean, so that just kind of completely sums up the point we're trying to drive home today.
It totally does. I'm looking at men's mental health. It's just called menshealth.com. And there's a full page of all of these public celebrities who have openly spoken about mental health. And one of the quotes from The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, is, "Depression doesn't discriminate." Genius. It sure don't. It does not. But we take it upon ourselves to sometimes internalize the expectations or the gender roles that are placed on us by society. And we maybe decide it's not something that we're going to deal with or we're going to talk about. So we're here today to tell you guys it's a thing. We want you guys to get help. We want you guys to be mindful of the stuff that's going on within yourself. There's nothing wrong with you. We do encourage you to work through it, whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm. And I think something you said, a point I want to make too, because, say it louder for the people back. Sometimes mental health, mental wellness, mental illness is related to life events, right? Sometimes we can look at our life and identify specific experiences that have led to where we're at. Sometimes we look at life and we feel like we have absolutely no reason to feel the way we do. Mm-hmm. That's because, our brain is an organ that, functions like the rest of our body. Right? There's chemicals in there that affect how you feel, just like your liver, right? I mean, you have diabetes. I guess there is a form of diabetes that's triggered by your lifestyle, but there's sometimes you can't do anything about it. It's just the chemical balance in your body, right? So if you're a guy and you're looking at your life like, man, I've got it all, and I should be fine. Sometimes it's just our biology, and there is help for that.
And when you guys do your own healing, you go on these journeys and you share them with other people, you give everyone else permission to acknowledge what's going on with them and to seek help too. And it's a beautiful thing. It really is. And we recognize today we're not giving you a whole lot of skills on how to deal with the stuff that's coming up. We have a lot of episodes that you can go to for coping skills and stress management and depression. So please go back through our episodes and watch those. Today is truly just about bringing light to the topic of men's mental health.
We're glad you joined us today because we are passionate about making mental health relatable and a part of everyday conversation. And part of that is bringing it to every person. So if you listened today and you felt like we were talking to you, good, that's what we were here to do.
And share this episode with somebody who you think can benefit as well. Share the entire podcast. Our goal is to help destigmatize all of the negativity around mental health and get you guys to resources.
Heck yeah, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. If you haven't already, like, share, follow, subscribe.
Thank you for joining Therapists Uncut, a production of AMP Smart Business. To learn more about Therapists Uncut and stay up on upcoming episodes, please subscribe and follow us on social media. As a reminder, although the Therapists Uncut co-hosts are licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to substitute professional mental health counseling. If you need professional therapy, please contact your local provider or primary care provider. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Therapists Uncut.